This is Eric Davidson, Chair of the RTD Board speaking. I will now call to order the March 21st Executive Committee. We are convened as of 12:01 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to please mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Please note that our committee meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are continuing to be held remotely via Zoom and are audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During today's meeting, we are providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like to access this service should please send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated into Spanish for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. I will now call for the attendance of our committee members, starting with First Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second Vice Chair Geisinger.
Here.
Secretary Guzman.
I am here.
Treasurer Bouquet.
Present.
And this is Chair Davidson. I am present as well. That is all 5 members of the Executive Committee present. For the sake of the record, I see that we are also joined by Director Deschel, Director Tisdale, and Director Sloan. Don't believe I've missed anybody there. I will note for the record and ask the board office's assistance in doing so if we are joined by other directors throughout the course of the discussion. Before I open up to public comment, I would just briefly like to see if there's any objection from the committee to taking our agenda slightly out of order today. Normally, we would approve our agenda for next week's board meeting before engaging in our discussion item of the monthly government relations report update. However, that discussion today does include an item that could lead to a further agenda item for our board meeting next week. As such, I'd actually like to take the government relations update discussion item prior to moving to approving our agenda for the board meeting. Are there any objections to that approach from board members? Great, seeing none, that's what we'll go ahead and do today. And Mr. Davies, thanks for joining us and being willing to go a little sooner. First, we'll go now to public comment and then our recommended actions before that discussion item. So I will now open up public comment to anyone who would like to address this committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and for the immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not done so, you may raise your virtual hand on Zoom, or you may press *9 on your phone. During this time, the committee does not offer any direct comments or responses. However, if you do wish to be contacted regarding your comment, you may email the board office using the email address rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Are there any hands raised for public comment? I am not seeing any. Mr. Kroll, have you seen anything?
Chair Davidson, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. I do not see anyone present who has indicated a desire to share public comment.
Okay, well, thank you. Seeing none, I'll then move forward and ask the board office staff, were there any emailed comments received for today's meeting?
Chair Davidson, Jack Kroll again, there were not any emails received prior to the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Office Executive Manager Kroll, much appreciated. Seeing no comments then, either during public comment or in written form, I will now close the public comment period and move into the recommended action portion of our agenda. There are 3 recommended actions this afternoon, and as a reminder for committee staff and anyone watching or listening, Any of these action items that are passed by this executive committee, even if the vote is unanimous, will be included on the board agenda under recommended actions so that the full board will have an opportunity to discuss any measure presented. For transparency, I would like to note that only 2 of these items, assuming that they were to pass today, will be included on the board agenda. The approval of the committee work plan has to be approved by the committee, but the approved work plan will be shared with the full board for reference and review. With all of that being stated, we'll move to our first recommended action. This is for the adoption of the board operating guideline amendments. This is for the board to adopt the amendments to the board operating guidelines. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Guzman.
Second, Bouquet.
I have the movement as Secretary Guzman, the second as Treasurer Bouquet. Thank you very much. I would now ask that Mr. Kroll, our Board Office Executive Manager, please make any comments or presentation that you would like regarding this matter.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. Jack Kroll, again, Executive Manager of the Board Office. The materials for your board packet included a red line version that had highlighted the changes that were made from the last time this item came before you all, which was in February, and it came before you all as a discussion item. We are grateful for the further input. Much of the highlighted comments came from Directors Tisdale and Sloan. There are some very reasonable changes in there, and the one major change I would argue that came forward was from Director Tisdale, who identified there had been some discussion to remove some language referencing unfinished fast tracks corridors. However, Director Tisdale pointed out, and we did some further research here in the board office, that the board actually passed a resolution in 2019 addressing those unfinished corridors. And I think it would be inappropriate for your board operating guidelines to, in effect, not match what was previously acted upon by the board in a resolution. So we reinserted that language based off of that feedback and made some slight revisions to it. But other than that, this is substantively very similar to what you all saw in in February.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I appreciate the comments on that and sharing the additional feedback that was received. Very much appreciate Director Sloan and Director Tisdale for submitting comments and helping to make adjustments, and particularly identifying areas where we would be incongruous with our with other board policies. So certainly thank you for those comments. Again, I'd like to thank Secretary Guzman and Treasurer Bouquet for taking the time to work in with Mr. Kroll, and thank Mr. Kroll for updating these guidelines. They are meant to be evergreen and revisited. So Mr. Kroll, thank you for raising this, working on this, and for all those who have spent time on it. With all that being said, I'll open up to see if there any discussion regarding these board operating guidelines as they appear in the packet. And I'll call for committee members or board. All right, seeing none, I'll go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? All right, seeing none, with the movement of Secretary Guzman, the second is Treasurer Bouquet. This does pass unanimously with 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions. Thank you. We will now move to the second recommended action. This is for the appointment of Director Lewis to the Operations and Safety Committee. This is for the Board of Directors to ratify Director Lewis's appointment to the Operations and Safety Committee. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Bouquet. Oh, you can take it, Peggy.
I heard the movement is Catlin, and I'll put the second in. So movement is first Vice Chair Catlin, second is Treasurer Bouquet. So if the committee would indulge me, I'd just like to briefly touch upon this. You know, as we all know, with the tragic situation and resignation of our colleague, Director Williams, when we made the committee assignments as a board earlier this year, Director Williams was not on one of our standing committees. Based on preference and based on some discussion, Director Busick had offered to fill in on the Operations and Safety Committee, for which Director Williams had been serving throughout her time at on the RTD board, and was also then likewise amenable to step aside should that be of interest to our newly appointed director. In this case, Director Lewis has indeed expressed quite a bit of passion and interest in joining the Operations and Safety Committee, having a number of ideas and experience to contribute and bring to that committee. So following conversations with both Director Lewis and Director Busick, Director Busick had offered to step aside from the committee so that Director Lewis may come onto the committee as the 7th member. That's what's led us to where we are here. We're, I think, all delighted to have Director Lewis and his experience that he would bring to this committee. So thank you for allowing me to share the rationale and a little bit of the background there. And I certainly would be remiss not to thank Director Busick as well for his willingness to help the committee move forward and also ensure that Director Lewis will have that spot. So with that, is there any discussion on this recommended action? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the votes. Are there any no votes? All right, wonderful. Seeing none, again, the motion will pass unanimously with 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions, this being the mover of first Vice Chair Catlin and the second of Treasurer Bouquet. So thank you very much, and very exciting to have Director Lewis. So it's certainly happy and exciting recommended action. And lastly, we'll move to our final recommended action, which is the approval of the 2024 Executive Committee Work Plan. This is for the Executive Committee to approve its 2024 Committee Work Plan. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second, Guzman.
I hear the movement as second Vice Chair Geisinger and the second as Secretary Guzman. Thank you. And now, again, I'll turn to Mr. Jack Kroll, our Board Office Executive Manager, to go ahead and fill in anything here. I would just add, this has been a good work in progress before I open up to Mr. Kroll here. And as we've talked about, this is the first time doing this. Perfect is certainly the enemy of good. There are opportunities to revisit this. I think certainly Executive Committee is going to face some twists and turns throughout the year, and there will be some areas that we do need to revisit. I would like to thank Mr. Kroll for engaging with me and with other members of the Executive Committee to help pull this together. Mr. Kroll, I'd like to just call on you if it's okay to see if there's anything in particular you'd like to highlight from some of the recent changes. I'm also just going to make sure I have the full table up in front of me as well here. So Mr. Kroll, if you'd like to make any comments, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Davidson. And again, Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. I do want to call attention to a couple items that were added recently to this. And that is, one is in relation to potential bylaw change, bylaw amendment rather, that would afford the chair the ability to make a committee appointment in the event of a vacancy. This arose out of the appointment of Director Lewis to the board by the mayor and the confirmation of that appointment by City Council. Effectively, Director Lewis didn't have anywhere to land on a committee assignment, and there isn't a process if there's a committee space that becomes vacated that's spelled out in your bylaws. The only bylaw the only area in the bylaw that references that is the initial naming of the committees on an annual basis. So that's a good process. It works well, but in the event you have an absence, you don't really have clearly defined processes. So that's a conversation that got added on here. The other items that were added that are perhaps of more interesting note is Director Geisinger had asked for a conversation around new director orientation and continuing director trainings that's been added to the work plan for June. And then in a carryover of some conversations that were happening last year between then Chair Geisinger and the Citizens Advisory Committee, you all will see some items next month and into May that relate to updating sort of the charge and the charter for the Citizens Advisory Committee. And with that, I think maybe one more item that I'll highlight here is in the back half of this year, looking at more clearly defining the role of the executive committee. Right now, the executive committee is responsible for government relations, legislation, outward facing communications from the board, and then ministerial matters relating to the board. And ministerial matters relating to the board, I think, could be spelled out a little bit more. It's been the practice of, since I've come on board, to really bring heavy hitting policy items that relate to board governance through the board, through the executive committee. And I think that would be something that would add to the clarity and the mission and the role of the executive committee in a meaningful way. So that's slated for a conversation in the back half of this year. And with that, I don't have anything else to highlight on this.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thanks for highlighting some of those substantive changes. There is quite a bit coming forward to the committee this year. Again, I think given that the committee is responsible in the government relations area with quite a bit of activity going on, it's likely that we'll be revisiting some items here. But Mr. Kroll, thanks for highlighting those. I'll open up the floor for discussion and questions from committee members first. And I see that First Vice Chair Catlin's hand is up, so please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Jack, for taking time with me earlier to go through this work plan. And as I reflected on it, the last time there was a vacancy, I believe it was me Eric went through the normal cycle, but back then we did not have committee assignments as we do now. Everything was committee of the whole. And so when it was then Chair Tisdale was in charge when I was appointed, it really didn't even need to be addressed because we were all members of the committees as a whole. And so this is the first time it's really come up. And I think putting a process in place for the chair to fill that vacancy makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to remind others that that's why we had never addressed it before. And this is fairly new. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Catlin. And yeah, I would just echo, I think, this is just one of those catches that we have from, new process and now going through the first vacancy experience with it. And certainly, the objective is to honor the bylaws we have around the election of officers in there, or the election of the chair and vice chair within the committees. But yeah, this would allow us to ensure that the vacancy is filled and a director is immediately able to then serve on the committee and have an effect. So thank you for the comments on that. Other questions or discussion from committee members? Okay, I also just did want to say as well, thank you, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, for working in with the board office there on the orientation and training items. Another important one, and the ongoing nature of that, I think, we'll look forward to discussing that. Board members, any board members, non-committee members have any questions concerning the committee work plan? All right, seeing none, I'll again go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Seeing none, this too will pass unanimously with 5 aye votes, 0 no votes, and 0 abstentions, with the mover as Second Vice Chair Geisinger and the second as Secretary Guzman. All right, well, thank you very much. As I mentioned before, we're going to go a little bit out of order. We're going to take the first of our 2 discussion items prior to moving on to our March board meeting agenda review. So this will be our monthly government relations update and discussion that we will take before moving forward. At this time, I would now like to hand the floor over to Mr. Michael Davies, our Government Relations Officer, to please present the item, which among other updates will have a lot to do with Senate Bill 24-184. So Mr. Davies, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Chair and members of the board. Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. As mentioned, I'll quickly go through the regular government relations report, and then I will follow up and end with a summary and discussion of Senate Bill 24184. So starting at the federal level, Saturday, March 9th, President Biden did sign into law the full or the remaining months of federal fiscal year 2024's appropriations bills. This is a package of bills, so it wasn't the full number of appropriations bills that funds our entire federal government, but it was a package of them. And included in that package of appropriations bills was the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, or the THUD bill, which funds U.S. Department of Transportation. Included in that bill were congressionally directed spending allocations. So RTD was awarded and appreciate the support from our two senators and from Representative DeGette, who sponsored RTD's direct spending allocation of $850,000. And these were for essentially projects throughout the entire country that are eligible projects for federal transportation funding, but essentially going back to the era of earmarks where Congress would direct certain amount of money to certain projects. That process has kind of restarted beginning last year in FY23. The second round was this year, FY24, and Congress is anticipating about doing this same process for FY25 as well. But as mentioned, RTD was allocated $850,000 for RTD's near-term downtown rail reconstruction project. Additionally, I think good news out of the federal appropriations bill was that enough funding was allocated to the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program to be able to fund the East Colfax BRT project. RTD has been in that multi-year grant process in partnership with the City and County of Denver to be eligible for funding out of the Capital Investment Grant Program. And with the appropriations bill's passage, funding is there. RTD just needs to now finish out, along with City and County of Denver, finish out the requirements to be fully eligible and hopefully receive that grant award from U.S. Department of Transportation. Lastly, wanted to mention there were a number of RAISE grant applications that were submitted by municipal partners that RTD supports, and wanted to make sure that the board was aware of some of those. The RAISE grant was due, the applications for the RAISE grant was due on February 28th. And there were 3 of them that cities from around the region requested RTD to support. So when RTD, we look at those projects and see how they can benefit RTD customers, and are happy to support our municipalities in seeking those federal grant fundings. The 3 projects were City and County of Denver, and that is a proposed pedestrian bridge that goes from the National Western Stockyard stop on the N line and connects over to the CSU spur. If any of you have ever had to walk that over, right now it's quite a lengthy walk. A pedestrian bridge would certainly make some wonderful pedestrian connections there from our transit stop. Second, the City of Lafayette, in conjunction with efforts around Colorado 7 BRT efforts that the Northwest region has really championed over the years. This is really improvements to one of the intersections along those lines to support the notion of continued development around Colorado 7 transit service. And those are largely pedestrian amenities and should make pedestrian movement around that intersection of 195th Street and Colorado 7 easier. Lastly, City of Thornton proposed a project that would again make some pedestrian and transit access improvements along 104th Avenue in Thornton. So that concludes the federal remarks. At the state level, and I will again follow up with the Senate Bill 184 in a moment, but just more broadly at the state level, and something that the board is engaged on, is Senate Bill 32, the methods to increase use of transit. That bill has been advanced to the Senate Appropriations committee. It's been there for a while now and really is awaiting, along with a huge host of other bills, is just waiting for the state to kind of finish out their long bill budget, and then they can start moving those bills that have been parked in appropriations for some time. They'll start moving those through committee, and we'll keep the board updated there. Moving on to the local update, there were 3 fruitful engagements with municipal partners since the last time that I gave a report to the committee. First, on February 27th, Director Sloan, Director Harwick, Director Catlin, myself, and our local affairs contractor, Jen Webster, did attend a staff briefing with the Jefferson County Board of Commissioners. And that was a welcomed opportunity and good chance to dialogue with the Board of Commissioners in Jefferson County. On February 29th, General Manager and CEO Johnson, Director Tisdale, Director Deschelle, Director Catlin, myself, and again, Jen Webster participated in a meeting with the City of Littleton and a number of other partners that participate in transportation in the City of Littleton. And again, a great opportunity to share priorities from RTD's perspective and hear from Littleton what they're focused on from a transit perspective. And then lastly, on March 7th, Director Sloan, myself, and again, Jen Webster participated in a joint meeting with Jefferson County commissioners and mayors. And again, great opportunity to share some of our priorities, share some of the details related to Tabor challenges, and overall, again, get a chance to hear from both commissioners and mayors from around Jefferson County about projects they're working on and how RTD can be a good partner to those municipalities. And then so going back to, and you all have seen press articles on this and the bill itself, Senate Bill 24184, titled Support Surface Transportation Infrastructure Development. And that's sponsored by Senate President Steve Fenberg, Senator Marchman, House Speaker McCluskey, and Representative Bosenecker. And that bill was introduced on Tuesday and is expected to be heard next week. I believe Wednesday is the date that I've heard, but that's not totally scheduled yet, but expected to be heard next week. There are 12 sections to that bill. Sections 1 and 2, and I'll just go through down section by section and give you a quick analysis of each section. Sections 1 and 2 are legislative findings and declarations. Section 3 is the section that's most primarily driven and connects with RTD. It makes changes to the RTD statute. It directs RTD in cooperation with Front Range Passenger Rail and CDOT to submit reports to the legislature and governor on implementation plans to construct and operate Northwest Fixed Guideway Corridor, including an extension from Longmont to Fort Collins. Included in that section 3 is authority for RTD to operate and construct rail service outside of the RTD boundary, as long as RTD is reimbursed fully for the construction and operation of anything that's outside of RTD's boundary. Again, just authority to do so. Sections 4, 5, and 6 of that bill are explicit authority to enter into IGA or a new legal entity, and that could be seen as a potentially a JPA or a different structure, but they use language a legal entity. From my understanding, RTD already has the authority to do that. So really, sections 4, 5, and 6 are statutory messaging to say we're just spelling it out that RTD can do something that we already have the authority to do if we wanted to. Section 7 is regarding reporting for CDOT and FRPR. It does not deal with RTD, but it deals with reports that would be mandated for both CDOT and FRPR to report to the legislature and governor. And I think that this is a big part of the bill. Sections 8, 9, and 10 really stand up a new fee. And so this would be a fee it authorizes a new fee on rental cars. It modifies the existing uses of how the state uses rental car fees that are currently in place, and modifies how the new fees added into that can be used for surface transportation projects, changes the definition of surface transportation projects within state statute. This is mostly in the statute that governs CDOT. And so essentially lays out a new path of how the state could contemplate using this new funding source that they're establishing and authorizing in sections 8, 9, and 10. As read through the bill, much of the messaging, and you've seen this in maybe some of the articles that have been printed, much of the priority of where they are planning and hoping some of that money goes to is some of the rail connections. That could be Front Range passenger rail. That could be the rail concept up to Craig and Hayden that they've talked about that goes along the UP track there. And then it could also include extensions of Mustang service and other services to help statewide transportation, statewide transit connections. Section 11 again is legal, or is legislative declarations, and Section 12 is the safety clause. So just circling back and to highlight again, Section 3 of the bill really is the section that does make statutory changes to RTD. RTD has had conversations with the bill's sponsors, and the bill sponsors have indicated there's a strong willingness to amend and change this language, and certainly a desire to partner with RTD on what works to move forward in this bill. And so with that, I will conclude my remarks and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Davies, thank you very much for your report, and thank you for the section by section walkthrough of Senate Bill 24184. I appreciate you being here and for all of the work. It's been a busy few weeks for you. So thank you. I also want to say for the sake of the record that Director Rosenthal has joined us. Just before opening up the floor for discussion, which I will do for committee members and directors all together, I want to just say a few words here. We do have a process. We do follow a process here. A bill has been introduced. We do have our lobbyists, Brandon Mary McKenna, at the state level that would be working on and engaging with us on this. This is now an introduced bill. We are a policy body of the whole. It is incumbent upon the board to have some discussion around our reaction to this and ask our questions, be understanding of this, and have some general guidance now to come out of this for staff to proceed forward with a recommendation for a position that the board may take as a whole. And prior to testifying in front of the committees or putting forward any kind of amendments, we'll need to take that position. So I had wanted to have this discussion here today so that we can have some idea of how we would like to direct staff, what to bring before the full board, and would like to add an agenda item to our full board meeting on Tuesday, which is why we've done this a little bit out of order. It does strike me that the primary section that has the most material impact on RTD is Section 3, where the word "the district" is used, but is referring to the Regional Transportation District, which differs then when in Section 5 we're referring to the district as the Front Range Passenger Rail District and its legislation. So in that Section 3 is where there's a number of things that are calling on RTD. For example, the development of a plan, an implementation plan that would come no later than September 30th, 2024, which obviously would come with a substantial fiscal note and obligations to the agency. As Mr. Davies alluded to, it is my understanding with recent discussions with bill sponsors that there is an opportunity to amend and to work on clarifying where the responsibilities for an intercity passenger rail plan would lie, which I will state for the record at this time is my opinion would make most sense to reside with the Front Range Passenger Rail District as opposed to the Regional Transportation District. So I think that Section 3 is where I believe there's a lot of opportunity to improve the language and clarify where responsibilities are. And again, just a reminder to everybody that what we need to do here is get some discussion and some sense of where the board is so that we can proceed forward and staff can bring us a recommended path forward on Tuesday for us to then take a position on. As Mr. Davies mentioned, it is my understanding that this will go to committee next week. That would start in the Transportation Committee, then it would proceed to Finance thereafter, and then Appropriations, where it may spend some time. So with that being said, I'll now open up the floor to any directors who are present here for any questions, any discussion, any general guidance, and points of clarification here for Mr. Davies. I'll start with Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, I will yield to any members who are on the executive committee, so I can yield to Director Geisinger, or should I just go ahead?
That's okay. It's a pretty important full board conversation here, so let's just go.
And I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. I'm not on video. I am eating lunch at the moment. I don't think anybody wants to see that. So I appreciate, first of all, your work, your leadership. By the leadership of General Manager CEO Johnson, Mr. Davies, Brenda Berry McKenna, all the folks who have been really speaking to legislators, including the bill sponsor on this particular bill, on these issues. So I'll just go to the heart of the matter, which is that Section 3. And so I guess my concern is that that we would be directed, and if we do participate in this program, that potentially our revenues coming in from the state, if we are, quote, guaranteed, if that word is being used, we are guaranteed to be reimbursed or funded for the creation and the running of this service. But what happens if the state's revenue declines? What happens if there's a recession and that there are cuts to their revenues? Having, seen that happen in the legislature where they have to cut even education, things that are very sensitive. So we could end up with a similar situation with fast tracks, that we saw, where we had a decline in revenue and yet we saw costs increase. So that is my primary question that I would have. And then I might as well just ask the follow-up with it so someone can answer potentially. If you drill down a little bit, this is going to be funded in part or in whole from fees on rental vehicles. And what happens in a downturn and people are not coming to Denver, or they're not coming to Colorado Springs, or what have you, and they're not renting vehicles, and the revenue declines because they're not renting those vehicles. And has anybody from the legislature spoken with the state tourism board or the tourism boards along the Front Range? And because I know it's very sensitive, the minute you charge an additional fee on rental vehicles, does that start to deter potential conventions from coming to Denver or Fort Collins or what have you? So I guess that is my concern.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. I'll kind of take the two parts of your comments there. Mr. Davies, I'll open up to see if there's anything further you'd like to elaborate on regarding the latter portion of Director Rosenthal's comments with the funding mechanism, and if there's been any additional conversation. Taking the first portion, Director Rosenthal, you mentioned just the financial modeling here, and given that Section 3 does include language stating that this is on page 12, that the district may extend construction and operations of Northwest Rail Fixed Guideway Corridor beyond the boundaries of the district if any and all capital and operating expenses that it undertakes outside the district are fully accounted for and reimbursed to the district by a public body. And given that it later calls for an implementation plan by September 30th, it's my understanding that, to your point, part of the implementation plan, or part of the whole plan, and any report we would generate would want to contemplate the financial model and the financial plan, which of course on the Northwest Rail Peak Service Feasibility Study, we're focused on the B line and the RTD project for fast tracks and modeling out costs, ridership and implementation, which obviously has been, an $8 million plan and taken some time that we're fortunately reaching a conclusion on. It's been my understanding that it's the Front Range Passenger Rail District has been working on their service development plan, which would need to include financial analysis and plan on the intercity passenger rail. So it's my understanding that they could probably modify that to focus on what's in the bill language here from Denver Union Station to Fort Collins. And then they could be looking at things like that financial sensitivity. But directly to your point, we would need a completely new study beyond what we've done with Northwest Peak Service Feasibility in order to get to those types of cost sensitivities and that type of plan. So that is my understanding, and I'm curious just on that first part of your comment, Dr. Rosenthal, if Mr. Davies, you could comment whether I've characterized that properly, and if you might comment on, what it will. I mean, we'll have to put a fiscal note forward, correct? So what it would look like for us to create a plan and model this, and actually is this more symbiotic, as I've just characterized, with what the Front Range Passenger Rail may already be doing with its service development plan. So just on that first portion of Director Rosenthal's comments, not on the rental fee yet, Mr. Davies, would you mind just weighing in briefly on that? I also see, Ms. Johnson, your hand is up. So if you'd like to go first, please go ahead.
GM Johnson, do you want to add in a comment first before I go?
No, you can present information, Mr. Davies. I want to add some color so there's an expectation and understanding of what it means by a service development plan and what that entails going forward and where there's synergies. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And Director Rosenthal, good question. And I think you raised the concerns that any project developer or planner would want to bring to a board before getting an actual authorized viable plan to move forward. As mentioned, this is just authorizing RTD to take these actions if and when a true financial budget or viable plan to construct and operate rail service beyond Longmont to North Collins or Fort Collins were to come to fruition. So this is just simply authorization that the board could consider this, does not mandate it.
If I may,
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Ms. Johnson, please go ahead.
Yes, further to the point about a fiscal note, recognizing that anything this agency provides will be a rough order of magnitude, as we do not know what we don't know. Recognizing that there is not a service development plan, recognizing that RTD has no information at the ready for things that rest outside of the RTD's boundaries. These numbers will be very loose. Recognizing that the genesis for any preparation of this rough order of magnitude will be predicated upon information that this agency has been able to acquire pursuant to efforts with the Northwest Rail Feasibility Study that focuses on the peak service option. And I'd be remiss to state that this organization has yet to receive cost estimates from the Burlington North Santa Fe Railroad. And so that's why I qualify it by being a rough order of magnitude. And I'm going to step outside of myself a little bit and state that recognizing that this has been put forward without a in-depth fiscal note and utilizing information that would be germane to make informed decisions relative to what the future might hold, I would just ensure that we all keep that in the back of our mind relative to what this may look like, since this is all conceptualized from the vantage point of planning activities, not about operations and maintenance or anything of the alike. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager and CEO Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Davies, for the answer there. I want to note for the sake of the record, Director Broom has joined us. Thank you for joining us, sir. And then Mr. Davies, are there any comments you wanted to make regarding the second portion of Director Rosenthal's questions, I think, or comments about the fees? Are we aware of any other stakeholders that have been consulted in this, or Anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Rosenthal, for the second part of your question there. I am not aware of the full discussion that bill sponsors have had with the various stakeholder groups that may or may not be impacted with regards to the rental car fees. I think all of the points that you raised are valid and things to be considered. But again, the fund that is being created isn't necessarily a directly impactful fund to RTD. Maybe you could contemplate that somewhere in the future, the definitions used in there, those funds could be used for projects that are associated with RTD, but it is certainly not a direct line to say this new enterprise and funds being created by this are going directly to RTD. So that is the way I've looked at that section. It hasn't been necessarily something that we can put into our wallet and start planning on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Thank you, Mr. Davies. I'll move next to Director Deschel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to sort of run through comments top to bottom. So starting with section 1, the bill appears to use wasted gas and the cost of wasted gas as justification for some of the costs, which appears to be inconsistent with state law, which focuses on putting more electric vehicles on the road. So you're using a cost of one item, which theoretically shouldn't be used for much longer as justification for a spend and as a way to justify the bill. Separately, there's a heavy focus on greenhouse gas emissions and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So on the first note, they note rental cars, which I touched on. But if you actually wanted to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it talks a lot about an equitable tax, and those who may not be able to afford a car outright may rent a car for a short period of time to do what they need to do. An equitable tax on greenhouse gas would actually be a cost of carbon. Or in the alternative, you would tax the private jets that are flying in and out of BJC, Vail, Hayden, etc. If you're focused on tourism and wanting to make sure that those funds are aligned. There's a talk about vehicle miles traveled and trying to reduce VMT, but there's a notable lack of use of one of the best tools that we have to reduce VMT, which would be bus rapid transit, which is notably missing. And so there's a lot of sort of logical fallacy that exists in section 1 as the justification for the bill. And while I know section 1 is not so binding, I do think it's important to call attention to, you want to be logically consistent in legislation. It's really important because that's how regulators interpret it. When it talks about RTD expanding its authority to spend funds, I recognize that this is probably more of a legal question, but there's certainly a question in my mind as to whether, the state has the ability to amend RTD's enabling legislation. Does it have the ability to amend the authority given by bonded funds to spend them outside of the district? And I don't know the answer. I don't expect anyone to have the answer offhand, but I do hope that someone's looked into that because we may be put in a situation, should this pass, to spend funds that set us up for a lawsuit for spending funds extrajudiciously. Even though the enabling legislation would allow us to operate, the fund supporting it may not. And I want to make sure that we've really considered that. There's a lot of discussion of a surface transportation infrastructure network. I don't really know what that means because the definition is a surface transportation infrastructure network is a surface transportation infrastructure network as stated in the bill. I believe that means roads. It's been very well studied that expansion of roads increases greenhouse gas emissions as opposed to decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. It discusses the creation of an agency and then also discusses the creation of the one new agency plus 2 existing agencies, making a 3rd agency, which almost certainly increases costs for taxpayers because each of those agencies needs its own executive director. Each of those agencies needs its own staff. And there's a question, I think there's a really valid question of which agencies should be responsible for which modes of transportation. But I think we're teetering on the bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake by having 4 agencies with auspices over one rail system. Recognizing that you could also do it through an IGA. There's reference in section 1 about identifying a way to combine our revenue streams to fulfill the train obligation. I do think it's important there to have a carve out for RTD such that we're not required to sacrifice service. With the delegation that brought in a direction that brought in section 1 without the same thing flowing through in section 3 or section 2, I do have concern that someone may put their thumb on the scale to say, it doesn't say how you have to combine the revenue. RTD, I believe, has the most revenue of any of those 3. So pro rata, RTD should therefore fund. And I don't know that I'd like to see us have a little bit more protection there. On section 2, it's unclear who pays for this convening, this negotiation of an IGA, and how that's funded. So I have concerns there that RTD is left holding the bag. It would be good to specify how that's going to be funded and who will be paying for it. Section 10 is the creation of a new government to oversee these funds with the intent to create a 4th agency, which I talked about. And then finally, I pulled the data that we have available to us with respect to the fee and the impact it can actually have, which I believe to be insufficient to cover the goal here. If you look at the Department of Revenue today, vehicle daily rental fee, it's $2.13. If you assume that every car that's going to be put forward under this bill is gas, just to really juice the numbers, it's about an 87% increase. In the 2022 annual report, the total daily rental fees was $30,281,122. If you use 30 million as the base and you assume an 87% increase due to the increase in fee, you're left with $56.1 million, which I think, as we all know, is wildly insufficient and also probably insufficient to bond over. Even if you assume, if you hand wave the capital expense, you raise it all through grants and other means. I know we have not yet finished our current study to make sure we're all using the same numbers, but I believe a prior study indicated that it would cost just for our section, right, just for RTD's Northwest Rail, around $50 billion in O&M, right? So if you hand wave the capital expense, it is still highly unlikely that 56.1 million can float the rest of the rail. And so my concerns here, I have no issue talking about how do we create efficiencies. I think investing more in transit is good. I think getting this first bite at the apple is beneficial. What I'm concerned about is that RTD may be obligated to contribute more and do more than this bill generates revenue for. And so those are my thoughts on the bill as written.
Thank you for all of the very thoughtful comments and calculations and thorough thinking there, Dr. Deschel. Very much appreciate it. I will now go to, and I didn't hear a question in there. Again, thank you for the comments. I did note your potential legal question, which we can come back to. Were there any things you wanted staff to address this time, Dr. Deschel?
No, unless I said something that was like an incorrect assumption or out of bounds. It'd be good to know the answer to the legal question. It can come via email. It doesn't need to come now, but I think that is frankly pretty important to understand as we decide a position on the bill. Other than that, no, just comments and a request for a carve out on language should the rest of the board and Michael Davies and everyone feel that appropriate.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Appreciate it. Excellent. I'll move to Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please.
Thank you. And yeah, I agree. Thanks, Director Deschel, for everybody, the very good questions. I think there are a lot of questions here. Michael, thank you for that section by section report. That was really helpful. One thing I hadn't thought about until just then, I think that the sponsors and drafters have indicated an interest in amending Section 3 so that RTD is not the lead organization, and we can come back to that. But in the reports required of CDOT and Front Range Passenger Rail in Section 7, I can't remember, are those totally just for them? Would we become part of that if the first part is amended? if section 3 was amended.
Mr. Davies?
Yes, thank you, Director Geisinger. Yes, to the first part of your question, willingness to look at that section 3 and essentially remove RTD changes to RTD statute in that section and potentially look at alternative entities to replace RTD in that, and that has been one of the willingness items, I think, to look at from bill sponsors. With regards to section 3, it does not, nothing in section 3 lists RTD's statute. So my read is that it is strictly for CDOT and Front Range Passenger Rail with regards to those specific reporting requirements.
Thank you. And that raises, I guess, another question that I think ultimately we'll need to look at, which is, with there are options that others might have in terms of amending section 3. One is that Front Range Passenger Rail would become the lead. One would be that we, have to enter the IGA or whatever the entity is, JPA or something, and all 4 would become a lead. So us thinking through what seems to make the most sense, I think, would be helpful. Likewise, in section 3, I think it's, and I've read it several times, it's ambiguous as to what they're asking us to build. And I think that was suggested by someone earlier, maybe the chair, that, if we're extending, if we're building it, are they envisioning Northwest Rail, or are they envisioning intercity passenger rail is kind of the simplest way to say that. And maybe if it's no longer RTD's responsibility to just build it or to plan it, that would become clearer. But I think that as we think about amending, that could become clearer in the statute as well. And then, I think whether we recommend an amendment on this or engage the conversation with the sponsors and the people promoting it, the dates are problematic. Having a report by September 30th, an implementation report, and some of the other dates in there, I think, are things we would want to address as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Second Vice Chair Geisinger. And First Vice Chair Catlin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things, and Director Deschel, thank you very much for your very thorough analysis and expression of concerns. I listened in on the Front Range Passenger Rail Board workshop that was held in February, and a lot of those board members were under the assumption that they would be able to use RTD's FISA account. That still concerns me that assumption is out there, even though GM CEO Johnston's been very clear about where the authority to spend that money lies. So I very much appreciate the efforts that you have put forth, Mr. Davies, and others with the bill sponsors and others, and especially with their willingness to amend section 3. I think that's a step in the right direction. And this is perhaps another concern that I have, and maybe my information is stale, but there's another entity involved there, and that's the CTIO, which is a special enterprise under, it's a business under CDOT, but it is separate. That has its own board of directors, and then there's the CDOT commission, and then this is yet another entity. And when Director Deschel talked about bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, I have some concerns there. They have the ability to collect fees, but back when I was the director of the predecessor to the CTIO, it was very, very clear that fees had to be direct user benefit. And my interpretation of a rental car fee that would go towards rail is not a direct user benefit. And I don't know if we would be subject to a legal challenge from the rental car agencies and or the users. And also to Director Deschelle's point about the equity piece. Those are just some thoughts that I have, and I'm sorry that they're rather random, but I just kind of look forward to watching this amendment process evolve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. Appreciate it. And I did want to touch on in your comments, one of the things you mentioned was the Fast Track internal savings account. And, you know, I'd like to thank General Manager and CEO Johnson, just as you acknowledged, Director Catlin, for clarifying in her role as an ex officio on the board of directors of the Front Range Passenger Rail District, that the FISA is our funds that were created in an account that was created by the board, and that the board of directors has auspices over that. And also would just like to note that this this week that we're in, General Manager and CEO Johnson and myself did convene with and send a letter to the Front Range Passenger Rail District's chair and general manager, just making sure we set out and clarify where we each independently stand, our understanding that they're working on the service development plan, conveying that we are nearing completion of our Northwest Rail Peak Service feasibility study, our intent to share information with each other, our understanding that there was no specific ask, and then also clarification on the use of Fast Track's internal savings account funds being under the auspices of the board. So Director Catlin, thank you for commenting on that, and just wanted to call attention to that letter having been sent earlier this week, and thank the general manager for the continued reminder of that at those board meetings. With that, I'll call on Secretary Guzman next.
Thank you. I have two questions and maybe a suggestion. And this is more thoughtful for the board members. But how do we contemplate now or later, given the structure of this, that we would use even a penny of RTD money externally to the district boundaries? I'm really bothered by the idea that that money would go anywhere outside of RTD, given the reality that we face and trying to provide the service that we strive for within the district boundaries. I think mention's been made of it for, you know, parts of Jefferson County. Broomfield loves to give us guff about the 128. We're facing summer changes, trying to do the service and the repair work within the district. How could we possibly contemplate spending one penny of our money outside of those boundaries that have been delineated? And I would not be interested in the least in having to go back to my constituents and try and explain why I would vote to participate in that sort of use of funds. So just a bit of a statement and some food for thought. I also don't think that it would be legal for us to use the Fast Track's voter approved language, which binds us in how we use that 0.4% sales tax that has been saved for Fast Track's uses for anything other than that. And an intercity rail was not contemplated in that language. It's specifically to be used for our commuter rail or light rail system within the district boundaries. So to break the bound, I think we would be facing potential legal action, and not in a good way. The difference between intercity that's addressed here and what we are contemplating for Northwest Rail Service are two completely different concepts and bypass communities. So there is an equity issue with that, and who we are serving and who is paying for the service. The moment we open up the boundary to north of Boulder County up into Fort Collins, we are then taking money from other areas and essentially using that for service to parts of the state that we do not have purview over. And I don't buy the guarantee of refund or reimbursement as far as I could throw paper airplanes made out of this bill draft, to be clear. Finally, is there any opportunity, and this would be my guiding maybe statement for Mr. Davies and for staff, is there any way that we can just simply ask the sponsors to remove RTD from this, because the onus and the responsibility of paying for, completing the studies of, and coming up with a plan for intercity rail to Fort Collins do not belong to RTD. They belong to the Front Range Passenger Rail and probably to the Colorado Department of Transportation, working in tandem together to figure out their business while we worry about our own issues here in this region, in this district. And I think it is, for lack of a better term, they're trying to break a piggy bank that doesn't belong to them. And it's our job, my job as an elected official to this board, to protect the taxpayer interest within this region. And I'll go to the mat on that. I'm not going to be the expert that they maybe want me to be, but I am going to be the person who pays taxes and wants to make sure that the money's used in the intended manner that it was given to be used, and for nothing else. And so I think what they're asking of RTD at this point is irrelevant to the business that we have to deal with at hand, and should probably be reassigned to the appropriate district and the appropriate authority. That does not mean that we will not have conversation with them. That does not mean that we will not cooperate with them on what we can. And that's not to say that I'm not open-minded to having those negotiations or discussing anything further, but as has been stated, there's no plan, there's no clear ask, the responsibilities are fuzzy at best, and it's a bit obfuscating to put RTD in the position of having to finance somebody else's project and plan that has nothing to do with the services, operations, or maintenance that we must attend to within our own district. You take care of the home first, and then you can help everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Guzman. And I think in that last point there, you were starting to hit at a question for Mr. Davies about is there an opportunity to remove RTD? And so I think, in looking at Section 3, and certainly what I've heard in the course of the discussion here, that's where the changes to our statute, to the RTD statute, are referenced, and where the descriptions are regarding operating outside the district's boundaries, the report by September 30th. So I'm wondering if, Mr. Davies, would you mind commenting, based on Secretary Guzman's comments and other comments here, what this bill would look like if the bill sponsors were open to amending Section 3 to an alternative entity other than the Regional Transportation District? Perhaps that's the Front Range Passenger Rail District, since they are working on an intercity rail service development plan. But what would that do to the bill? We heard from Director Deschel about the potential need for a carve out to protect services within the district. Just, I guess, looking at the bill very holistically, zooming back out and looking at all those different sections, if Section 3 changed from RTD to an alternative entity, where RTD is called upon to be one of the collaborative entities, but not the accountable lead entity, what would the rest of this bill look like in terms of our responsibilities at RTD and what any fiscal impact could be? Would you mind commenting on that, Mr. Davies?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Guzman. Before I touch on the well-framed hypothetical scenario there, just to assure you, the concerns that you raised are exactly the concerns that staff has also raised with bill sponsors. So we very much track along exactly your thinking on those question statements that you said. Speaking to Chair Davidson's hypothetical, the way that I read the bill, and I think others agree when read through, when you change RTD statute to mandate RTD take the lead in studying a potential rail solution that's outside of RTD's district, that does raise that concern of using RTD taxpayer dollars without a clear funding source to fund that planning process. And so that is very much something that we have raised with the bill sponsors in the short time that we've had since this bill was actually introduced and RTD was actually able to see it. So going along with Chair Davidson's thought there, if you were to not change RTD statute, but if you were to change Front Range Passenger Rail statute to say Front Range Passenger Rail, here is the charge in your statute that the state would like to add to your statute to perhaps continue or think about planning on a corridor that you're already planning on and for a service that you're already planning. That in many ways seems like a logical and appropriate approach to look at going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. And then in that case, do we, if that were to happen, I mean, do we face fiscal impact on that plan? How would we be obligated? There are in that section 3, so it refers to the district being the regional transportation district, quote, in cooperation with the Department of Transportation, the high performance transportation enterprise created in section 43-4-806-2AI, and the Front Range Passenger Rail District created in section. So in that case, there is this collaboration. If we were to make that hypothetical change, and this were to say change the statute of Front Range Passenger Rail District, I would assume then that the regional transportation district would move down as one of the cooperative entities. And perhaps this is a question for Ms. Johnson. Would we have financial obligations or impact and or continue to face any of the risk of needing to commit resources to projects outside of our district? Would that remain, or would that effectively no longer exist should such an amendment be made to section 3?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
So recognizing the whole intent is to optimize operational efficiencies, to the point that Secretary Guzman made, the Regional Transportation District does not provide intercity passenger rail service. We provide commuter rail service that would be most in parallel with what this bill is seeking. So with that as a backdrop going forward, if in fact RTD was removed, of course we would lean in as relates to complementary aspects of service delivery for the better part of providing passenger rail service. But what I would surmise is that the obligation with RTD would be within the boundaries of the Regional Transportation District. And if by some miraculous event, there was a plethora of money where Northwest Rail could be completed, then we would go to the terminus within the RTD boundaries, and perhaps there's some fashion of a cross-platform transfer whereby intercity passenger rail is operated by the Front Range Passenger Rail District or delegated to an operating provider of the Front Range Passenger Rail District's choosing via a solicitation process. Does that address your question?
It does. It does. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I appreciate that. First Vice Chair Catlin, please.
Thank you. And Ms. Johnson, you pretty much answered the question that I was about to pose. And that is that we could continue on what has been a parallel track, pardon the pun, with our study going forward on the peak service plan, and then a separate plan for the Front Range passenger rail. And we would continue along those parallel courses to complete our study and then see what was feasible along those lines. And then, as Dr. Davidson said, drop down to be a collaborator or a stakeholder, if you will, in the process, but not being directly responsible. So I think you both answered my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin. Other questions, comments from directors present? I'd like, please, Secretary Guzman.
Sorry, I was trying to find my buttons. So, like, I don't know where everybody else stands with this, but as it is written, I would be in opposition to it. With some amendments, I might take no position on it if we were asked that question. But with RTD being included in this and not really having the data set that we need to make an informed decision, I'm more inclined to stand against this type of bill going forward without serious consideration for RTD's part in it. I just want to put that out there so that you know, and I know that this is not the board meeting and we're not making that type of decision, but to be clear, without further information, I'm not convinced this is the right move to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Guzman. And that gets to the broader question I was going to ask the group of any directors that are present. So given that we do have a rather compressed timeline, I think it's incumbent upon us here to have a general idea of what we would like to see come before the board on Tuesday as a recommended path forward. So I think I'd like to just hear from directors who are willing to raise a hand and speak up, just as Secretary Guzman did, as to where you are directionally right now. It's encouraging to hear that there is an openness to amend, particularly Section 3 with the bill sponsors, given that that is where there is substantial obligation for the Regional Transportation District and some question. But there's a number of ways we could go about this. So if we could get some just general comments and understanding of where folks are at, then staff can make a recommended path for us coming in on Tuesday. I see Director Tisdale first. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciated Secretary Guzman's comments. I think they were very well taken, and I concur in those. I have significant concern with the bill as drafted. I don't have the benefit of seeing it here, but from the discussion, I've discerned much of what it must say. I would agree that if presented as is, that I would support a position of oppose. In order to secure the changes that might make this an attractive bill, I would like to say that perhaps we could consider saying approve if amended, rather than no position if amended. I think that we need to offer an olive branch here, particularly given the other issues that are undoubtedly going to come up in this legislative session, and that perhaps, God willing, we might get some good faith back from the legislature if we demonstrated some ability to collaborate here. But it definitely needs to be amended.
Tisdale for the comments, much appreciated. I'll go next to Treasurer Bouquet.
This is just to add weight. I share the same sentiment that Director Tisdale says. Is I believe there needs to be that amendment process to go forward. So I just wanted to add weight to that if we are going to get to a yes or approval of it, I think the amendments need to happen. So I just wanted to add some weight to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer. Other comments from directors? Yes, Second Vice Chair Geisinger, please. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm in the same place that, Section 3 at a minimum needs to be amended. I do continue to have concerns about the dates and what's being required. So approve as amended. I guess I'm generally there. I just have some concerns about what we approve at the same time.
Thank you. First Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you. I'm generally there too, but it's conditional on the amendments. So it would be a wait and see for me in terms of whether or not I would be comfortable approving it, because the amendments may or may not be in RTD's favor. Although I do agree with the very cooperative approach that you all have taken with our legislators, given the environment. And we need to, as Director Tisdale mentioned, perhaps extend some sort of an olive branch. But I don't want to give up the farm just for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Guzman, please go ahead. Oh, no problem.
My computer froze.
Understand.
Sorry, I was just trying to figure it out.
No problem. Been there. I'll make a comment. I'm very much, I've heard some maybe oppose, some must, amended, some maybe support, approve if amended. Clearly some theme of amendment. I definitely like first things first. I mean, the only way to get to step 10 is take step 1, step 2, step 3. To me, section 3 definitely is problematic. And I think that, I'd like to see that amended. I'd like to understand what impact that has. And I think that it has a lot to say about whether what position would come next. So I think I'm in a similar place on that spectrum as what I'm hearing so far here from directors. Are there other directors with any comments on this? Mr. Davies, I'd like to ask you, you've been close to this, again, it's been a very compressed timeline, I'm aware, and thank you for going deep in all the meetings you're taking and going back and forth. Given what you know about this and, given the discussion we just had on those sections, do you feel that you have some direction to frame up what some favorable amendments could look like based on the nature of this discussion that could then come before the board for consideration on a position on Tuesday?
Yes, I do, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Unless there's objection, what I would propose then is that we work with Mr. Davies as well as our lobbyist team, and I'm happy to work in directly with them to consider what an amendment would look like, or amendments would look like that would get this to a more reasonable place before we take a position, and to make sure that we have that to come forward to the board as a recommended action on our Tuesday agenda to be added. I think it sounds like a reasonable approach, but I just want to see if there's any objections to that before we proceed. All right. Great. Well, with that being the case, I'll address that when we get to the agenda section, but I think I have an idea of where we want to take things from here. And as always, I invite directors to please reach out to me with any additional thoughts and considerations on this. Great. I'll just briefly ask, just since there was obviously a lot in the report there, Mr. Davies, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Davies while he's here and we are wrapping up our government relations update discussion, not related to the Senate Bill 24-184? All right, I see. I'm going to go first to committee members on this one with the questions. So I'll start with Secretary Guzman.
Just really quickly, and I thank you in advance, Mr. Davies and CEO Johnson. I am working with the committee with Access Colorado, and I had sent that request. So just to gentle reminder, we need to follow up with them too. So if I could get some of that information from you, when possible, just so I know what to speak to when I'm visiting our friends in DC, that would be very helpful. And thank you for the breakdown. It's really what I'm looking for. So just need to make sure that I'm on top of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary. Director Tisdale, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I read with great interest a somewhat confusing and disjointed news account yesterday relative to discussions between Denver and Jefferson County about, quote, extending the W line to Red Rocks, which I guess when you try to dig through the, as I said, confused writing, constituted some kind of analysis of a bus bridge from Golden to Red Rocks. And I was hoping that at some point we might have some input from staff relative to what discussions there have been and what presumably that means, because as written, it left me, especially as the director for one of the orphan fast tracks lines down to Highlands Ranch, somewhat confused and concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Tisdale. I see Ms. Johnson's hand. So General Manager CEO Johnson, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Tisdale, for the question. I received an email from Director Rusha yesterday about the same subject, requesting an update. And as I shared with her in my response in which I copied the board office, I, nor our planning department, nor our service planning division have had any discussions relative to this. And so I too learned about it from the media clip that you did. Some time ago, there was a request from City and County of Denver staff potentially to use a space in our bus box for a bus. That was the extent of it, and there had been no further conversations relative to that. So I just wanted to share that here in this public forum. I've had the opportunity to meet with Councilmember Watson. It was on a different issue pertaining to the L line and what might happen in the future with a connection to the A line. That meeting took place, God, we're in March. I want to say the latter part of January, early part of February. In no shape or form did this topic ever arise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, GMCO Johnson. I saw Mr. Davies, your hand go up. Was there a comment you wanted to make on that, sir?
Yes, Chair, and Director Catlin may raise this same point. This was brought up at one of the Jefferson County meetings that I mentioned in my government relations report. The way it was framed to us was this is really Commissioner Kerr and others in Jefferson County working with Councilmember Watson, who's mentioned in that article, to contemplate how individuals who may take the W line out to the end of line could receive some sort of a bus shuttle service to get to Red Rocks. And the way it was framed to us was certainly this is an independent project from RTD and something that the county, Jefferson County and City and County of Denver are looking at and contemplating. And all I would offer is that our RTD did educate those individuals in the meeting on RTD's partnership program as just an outside program that may or may not be of interest to them connected to this. But nonetheless, this is an independent project that they were working on themselves, from my understanding.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Davies, for that comment. We'll see if your prediction was right about First Vice Chair Callan. Sorry to skip over you. Director Callan, please go ahead.
You were spot on. It was brought up by Commissioner Kerr, and you were kinder than I would have been. They expressly said they did not want RTD to be involved in the discussion because they didn't want it to bog down their process. I think some of the confusion, we did talk about the partnership program possibilities, but I think some of the confusion that you may have experienced, Director Tisdale, was especially like last night's Channel 9 News that interviewed Councilman Watson, and he specifically said extension of the W line. And that really was misleading because they were contemplating some sort of a bus bridge or a shuttle service. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, First Vice Chair Callan. Secretary Guzman, please.
Well, just while we're on the topic, we do have some interesting service change proposals coming before the board at next week's meeting, including a permanent change to the W line hours, which was sent through committee to come to us, and that may change, but for right now, that's the information that we have available to ourselves and the public. So until that changes, any idea of doing this, especially during the summertime months when that's when Red Rocks is used the most, might not be beneficial to helping our riders. So I think that engaging in the conversation and trying to understand what Jefferson County and Denver County are doing would be the most beneficial thing to our riders and potentially increase ridership and decrease greenhouse gases so that we're not taking individual trips up to Red Rocks and we're able to utilize the public system that has been placed through Golden back to Denver for concert goers. So just
yes,
for that.
Thank you, Secretary Guzman. And I do believe, I don't want to jump ahead, but we may hear a little bit more from General Manager and CEO Johnson on that area you alluded to in other matters. Thank you for the comments. All right, seeing no more hands, Mr. Davies, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming early to be bumped up in the meeting. I know you had to get back from the Capitol. Secretary Guzman, I see your hand. Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, no problem. So, Mr. Davies, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'll be seeing you shortly. And thank you. All right, we will move up to the March board meeting agenda review portion of our agenda. As you may have noticed when reviewing the board agenda outline, there is an item related to the downtown rail reconstruction project that is coming forward for our collective consideration at the board that did not go through committee. That item, the downtown rail intersection reconstruction contract award, will be added to the agenda per bylaws article 5, conduct of business, section 6, the regular board meeting agenda, B and C1, chair's discretion and items from the general manager. This is because this concurs with the plan set forward in my email to the board on February 29th regarding how we will review and provide authorization and approval to certain items relating to the downtown rail reconstruction project. So just calling attention to that having been added to our board meeting agenda. I'd also like to note that the recommended action language for that item will read as follows. For the board of directors to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to enter into a contract with Krish Construction Incorporated or KCI for the full depth reconstruction of 5 intersections in downtown Denver in an amount not to exceed $4,320,384 US. I would also like to note that on the agenda, there was one small error which occurred when the monthly government relations report was inadvertently carried over as a discussion item from the executive committee agenda to the full board agenda for discussion. And as such, given that that is just a minor error, I am going to remove that item from the agenda. Finally, based on our conversation that we had during the government relations update, I am going to suggest that we put forward on the agenda for Tuesday's meeting a recommended action to take a position on our Senate Bill 24-184, which I would anticipate will take a recommendation from staff on this once they've had a chance to work with the discussion of today, but would anticipate that would include an amend position of some kind. So with that being the case, I also will just state that when we do have that, my intent would be to facilitate a robust discussion on the bill with the board when we do entertain that action. And from there, then the board can decide what action to take prior to this bill going to committee. I do thank our board directors who were able to participate today. I know midday meetings can be difficult. We had 10 directors here and very, very much appreciate that. We will again address this on Tuesday. So with that additional information, and again, summarizing the addition of the contract recommended action that did not go through a committee, with the adjustment for the error made on discussion items and the removal of the government relations update, and with the addition of an action with regards to Senate Bill 24-184, I would like to see if there is a motion for the March board agenda to the board meeting on March 26th. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Guzman, as amended and corrected by the chair.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Bouquet.
Moving Guzman, second Bouquet. Is there any discussion on the agenda? There appears to be a problem here. Okay. Great. Okay. Can you hear me now on the, can someone just confirm they can hear me? Great.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. I had a little bit of a hiccup. Everything dropped on Zoom there. My apologies for that. I am reconnected. All right. Seeing no discussion, are there any no votes on this action? All right. With 5 aye, 0 no, and 0 abstentions, that motion will pass. With that, we'll move to our back to discussion items. We had a second discussion item. This is for the draft property and station naming policies. At this time, I will now ask Executive Manager Jack Kroll, would you please present this item?
Thank you, Chair Davidson. And again, this is Jack Kroll, Executive Manager of the Board Office. I'm going to carry the bulk of this presentation, if not all of it, as well, Michael Davies did contribute significantly to this. As you all can tell, his life is very busy right now. I do see a hand raised from Director Catlin.
I truly apologize. I had looked at my schedule incorrectly, and I have to be at a physical therapy appointment at 2 o'clock. So I will need to drop off of this call. There was one other matter that I had wanted to bring up, and that was before you go into your presentation, and that was with regard to some of the work that you all have been doing and with some of the other directors on agency response system that you're working on to provide a more systematic, thoughtful, business-like approach to matters that come before staff and the board, so that we're respectful of staff time and respectful of the office, board office time. And that's going to be coming on board fairly soon. I just wanted to alert you all to that, that we will be taking that up in a discussion. And I know Jack has been working hard on that, but we just need to provide some discipline in the way we bring forward requests to staff and to the board office. And I was hoping that this executive committee could take the lead on that. That's all I had, and I do apologize for needing to get off.
No problem. Thank you, First Vice Chair Catlin, and apologies about the timing. And thank you for that and for your work with staff on the agency response system and helping to bring a more disciplined approach and transparent approach for the sharing of information and the consolidation and centralization of that. I think we all look forward to understanding that process better and what data we might get from that and how we can better engage with staff as a board. I thank you, Mr. Kroll, for holding on that. And I know we've jumped forward a little bit. I did see Second Vice Chair Geisinger, your hand go up. So I'd like to call on you next just to see if there was something related to that.
Yeah, I apologize too, that I have to leave in just about 12 minutes for a similar reason. So just letting you know, thanks.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. I think with that, and Mr. Kroll, we did talk ahead of time about the challenge of time that we could run into on this. And perhaps that's why you have your hand raised. I'll go ahead and call on you.
Yeah, Director Davidson, I know that GM and CEO Johnson has an important update to share about a more timely matter. And my recommendation is simply you can carry the item with respect to property and station naming policy. We could simply, we have two options here. I could simply present the item next Tuesday to the full board, or we can, given the agenda for that meeting is also quite packed, I can carry this forward and we can simply present it in April.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll, for the suggestion. I did see Secretary Guzman's hand up. So please go ahead, Secretary, if you have a suggestion along these lines.
I just would move to table the discussion item until April at this point, and we can pick it up then.
Great. Do we have a second on that?
Second, Bouquet.
Any objections? Seeing none, with all 5 committee members in favor, I enthusiastically support that. Mr. Kroll, thank you. I apologize for the delay there, but we will take that to April for discussion at executive committee and then to the April board meeting. Great. So with that, thank you everybody for the patience here. We will then move to other matters at this time, and I will ask other matters. Mr. Kroll, you alluded to something. General Manager Johnson, you may want to share. I will call on you first if you would like.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to share some very pertinent information with you all. Last Wednesday during the course, Wednesday being March 13th, during the course of the Operations and Safety Committee, there were conversations that ensued relative to the service change. And with that as a backdrop, there were several questions that were posed talking about the permanency of things that would happen. And in the response that was provided, I discerned that there was quite a bit of trepidation and angst. I actually opined as well as to the response that was provided by our Senior Manager of Service Development and qualify for everybody that there's no such thing as anything being permanent as it relates to service delivery. But with that as a backdrop, I want to provide context for all of you, just so you understand our light rail network. I think it's very germane in the sense that we are very limited in how we deliver service here at this organization. After that meeting, I specifically rolled up my own sleeves and met with a myriad of different staff individuals from service planning as well as service delivery. And the reason I qualify this is because it's important to note that we at this agency have only one light rail facility in which all of our trains pull out into revenue service from. That's not common. So with that, when a conversation ensued relative to a last train being at 10 o'clock, that was referencing a departure time, recognizing that anything that leaves is Denver Union Station, there's still 47 minutes to get out to the terminal and then to get back to the actual rail facility. However, with that being said, I would be remiss in light of the conversation or the topic that First Vice Chair Peggy Catlin broached. I want to take this opportunity to say that our staff works hard and we are doing things intentionally. And oftentimes I believe that you all are working hard as well, but there's moments where information may be misconstrued, and I would just request of this body to always assume good intention. I was taken aback to receive some communique where it was indicated that staff were trying to hide something. That is not the issue here. And so with that, I wanted to take this opportunity to address the matters before us in this forum to say that staff has modified our service delivery model that would take effect in May. And I want to provide some qualifiers. There was a question that was posed as to, I don't understand what's happening with the coping panel projects. Why would this go on longer? One thing's for certain, that we need to have a maintenance window to do regular inspections of track as we look at our flangeway and things of the like. And so with that being said, as we look at our Public Transportation Agency safety plan, there are certain elements that we need to do to ensure that we can get out on our maintenance and have maintenance of way staff perform routine inspections and maintenance. With that as a backdrop, with the last service change, a window was decreased only to 90 minutes to do some work. Recognizing that all trains come out of Elati, there's deadhead time in which to do that. But more importantly, what you all may not be aware, before anybody can get on that right away, we have to mobilize units. But before we do that, we have to de-energize power, which can take nearly an hour to de-energize and then an hour to re-energize. So that's already 2 hours in a maintenance window. And so basically, if you only had 90 minutes, that would only provide 30 minutes to do inspections. So wanted to provide that. So as we go forward, I want to, thank my staff specifically for rolling up their sleeves and for being creative relative to what it is that we need to do. So what we intend to bring forward on Tuesday is an updated service plan as relates to our light rail service delivery model, recognizing that there was ample concern, and rightfully so, as it related to Sunday through Thursday service delivery on some critical light rail lines. We are going to shift our window and ensure that we have service delivery on the D line from 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. So we're shifting the window relative to when we pull out service for its commencement for 5 a.m. in lieu of 4 a.m. So we have that window on the back end for people to utilize the service. And so as we look at it holistically, we will be amply prepared to go in detail. What we're going to do with the report in and of itself is highlight those changes, literally highlight them at the beginning of the report, so board members have an understanding and can garner what is happening. I would also say as we go forward in reference to delineating between service planning and service delivery, that it's my intention to have our service delivery professionals talk about the operability and what happens therein when questions are posed, as opposed to service planning, because there is a difference, but they go together like a hand in glove. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to express that information at this juncture. One qualifier I will say, if in fact we need to take time, because this is not equally distributed, and what I mean by that is, the one thing I didn't share is we look at our deadhead times. I just want to give you a little snippet to better qualify what I mean. So when we talk about trains deadheading from a terminal, it takes 20 minutes for a train to get from Mineral to Elati, 30 minutes from Denver Union Station to Elati, 40 minutes from Lincoln to Elati, 45 minutes from Fed Center to Elati. And our longest route is 71 minutes of deadhead time from Peoria to Elati. So as I was educated and informed, I asked the question why we only had one light rail facility. It's because we wanted to save money. And as we look at what we're up against, as we look at this legislation coming forward, I would impart upon you to ensure that you all ask the appropriate questions, because never would I say that we should only have one light rail facility because people are concerned about money. This is why we have the problems that we have. And you can tell I'm passionate about this because, once again, we are trying to do the best we can to ensure that we're keeping our assets in a state of good repair. But through designs, it has limited our ability to do so and manage the expectation of people that have come to be reliant upon RTD services. So thank you very kindly for the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to provide that context.
Yeah, General Manager and CEO Johnson, thank you very much for all of that, for sharing all of that. Thank you for sharing the sentiment of, requesting, assuming a positive intent. Certainly, I think that resonates and is important. We're fortunate that we're surrounded by a lot of folks here who all share a passion for transit and seeing people move to and fro throughout the community. So assuming positive intent is a great call to action for all of us to continually do and ask of ourselves. So thank you for that. And thank you very much to you and to the whole staff for, as you said, rolling up your sleeves to think about how to respond to some of the comments that have come in and how to manage expectations, which clearly is a delicate and difficult matter when it comes to taking care of things that are aging, but we're not necessarily built in such a manner to make the taking care of them easy to do. So thank you for highlighting that for all of us. I think that's well understood and characterized, and I think I speak for all of us when I say I look forward to seeing the creativity and adjustments of the team this upcoming week. And thank you for that. I know, again, we've talked about compressed timelines a couple times here. This is another one of those compressed timelines, especially with all of the maintenance that is going on. So thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Johnson at this time regarding that other matter while she is here and while we're on that topic? Secretary Guzman, I see you.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for addressing it. Thank you for working with staff to find a creative solution to it. And thank you for coming back to us with the information. I think sometimes the comments come or questions come out and they're not intended to be disrespectful or surprising, but we're the liaison between our communities and this agency as elected officials. And so we get hammered on questions, and they may get passed on in a manner less than ideal, because we're also on compressed schedules as well, trying to communicate back and forth. And so I just want to tell you, I appreciate you and all of the staff's effort, and I look forward to seeing the reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Guzman. I appreciate that kindly. I'm trying to keep a team that's been constantly kicked in the teeth motivated, and sometimes it becomes a lot. One thing I do want to say, that recognizing you talked about keeping things in a state of good repair, Mr. Chair, when we talk about these windows, this is just typical maintenance that we do, right? And we have forgone that, and so that's what causes us. But let me ensure that you're aware that during the course of the summer, since we adjusted these windows, if there's work that's warranted, in a heartbeat, I will make the decision to shut down the system so we can do necessary repair work. And if that happens to be over, you know, a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, so we can do what we need to do because we only have a 90-minute window elsewhere, trust and believe I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager and CEO, for the point of clarification, and Secretary for your comments as well. Any other questions or comments on this matter? Any other matters? I will just touch on, and I thank our First Vice Chair Catlin for her comments regarding the agency response system. I think actually right along the lines of General Manager and CEO Johnson, I think we acknowledge what you were saying of getting these requests, and Secretary Guzman, to your sentiments of getting requests from constituents. I think we recognize that there's a lot of things that come into the board and a lot of things that come from the board to staff. So finding ways to really structure that, bring transparency to that, bring accountability to that, I think is certainly incumbent on this board this year to really perfect that process to ease the burden in a staff-constrained environment that we are all in. So, General Manager CEO Johnson, thanks as always to you and your team for the partnership and work with this board and with the community. And I certainly thank the board office and First Vice Chair Catlin for the work on the agency response system that can help, I think, in this regard. With that, again, we'll continue other matters. Mr. Kroll, I did see your hand go up. I just want to see if there's something you want to touch on related to one of these matters.
Yeah, Chair Davidson, I just want to sing the praises of the board office and staff with respect to the agency response system. They work really hard. It's been obviously I'm new to the role in the last 8 months, and they have connections across this agency that allow the directors and the board office to get information to you all very quickly, and they work really hard to ensure that happens. We have seen, in addition to the transition in the office, we've seen about a 60% increase in the number of requests coming from directors for information. And we hope that this new system that Jillian worked very hard to put together with our IT department really helps streamline things and not only gets you all information as quickly as possible, but gets you, comprehensive information as well. And that's well coordinated with the GM and CEO's team in the executive office. The plan is to launch that new system next week. And so if you have occasion and you're around the office, please do thank Jillian for all of the work that she put in on this, because it's really quite innovative and will really help ensure that you all are getting the information you need when you need it.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. I appreciate it, and echo the sentiment. The poll office and Jack, Marie, Jillian, Taishrei, the work that you do, it's a lot and very much appreciated. And Jillian, thank you for your work on this agency response system. I know that Director Catlin was disappointed to have to leave, but has some thoughts around what we'll learn from this. I think there's opportunities to gather data about the nature of requests, and I think there's a lot of things that we can do and move forward in this committee as well as a full board, and discuss throughout the course of other matters as to how we might want to leverage that system to perfect our processes even further. So thank you for that, and to the board office. Director Broom, I see that your hand is up.
Point of personal privilege. Ruthie and I are celebrating our 62nd wedding anniversary this week. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Congratulations, Director Broom. Congratulations. All right, with that, that's a happy note to potentially end on. Not saying we have to. Are there any other matters to come before the executive committee? All right, well, with that being the case, again, a big congratulations to Director Broom. The next meeting of the executive committee is scheduled for Thursday, April 20th at 12 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Our work plan is going to adjust slightly based on the tabling of our discussion around the station naming policy. We were slated to act on that. I will work with the board office to make the adjustments necessary to make sure that we give due time to our property and station naming policy, which I'm tremendously grateful to our directors and staff who had worked on that. Additionally, we'll of course have our monthly government relations report, which is certain to be interesting, I think, in April, given that that will be towards the end of this legislative session and there is still some legislation to come. Seeing no further discussion, we will adjourn this meeting as of 1:57 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. I'll be seeing you all soon. Take care.